London, 1855. The ballroom of Lord and Lady Wetherby shimmered with candlelight, the glittering chandeliers casting golden halos upon the sea of silk and satin below. Jewels winked from the throats and wrists of women whose laughter tinkled like the champagne in their crystal flutes. At the center of it all stood the Duke of Halsbury, James Harrington, his broad shoulders and commanding presence drawing every eye in the room. "Have you heard?" Lady Constance Whiteley whispered behind her fan to her companion. "The Duke has taken a bride." "A country miss, I'm told," replied Mrs. Fitzsimmons with a sniff. "Some insignificant little thing from Derbyshire. No connections to speak of." "How extraordinary," Lady Constance murmured, her eyes never leaving the Duke's tall figure. "After refusing every eligible young lady these past 5 seasons, he chooses someone no one has even heard of." "They say she is positively plain," Mrs. Fitzsimmons continued, relishing the gossip. "Thin as a rail with no notable features whatsoever. One wonders what could have possessed him." The object of their speculation stood apart from the gossiping throng, his dark eyes surveying the room with practiced detachment. At 32, the Duke of Halsbury had long been considered the most eligible bachelor in England. His fortune was vast, his lineage impeccable, and his appearance, with his broad shoulders, strong jaw, and thick chestnut hair, the subject of many a young lady's dreams. Yet 3 weeks ago, he had shocked London society by announcing his marriage to a complete unknown, Miss Eleanor Prescott of Derbyshire, daughter of a country physician of modest means. "I hear she is to be presented tonight," Lady Constance said, straightening as the Duke moved toward the entrance. "I confess I am dying of curiosity." The murmurs in the ballroom grew to a hushed anticipation as the Duke paused at the doorway. Then, offering his arm to a slight figure who had been waiting in the corridor beyond, he escorted her into the room. A collective intake of breath followed. The new Duchess of Halsbury was indeed plain. Her chestnut hair, though neatly arranged, lacked the elaborate curls favored by society. Her face was unremarkable, no dazzling eyes, no perfect rosebud lips, no alabaster complexion. She wore a gown of pale blue silk that, while certainly expensive, did nothing to enhance her slight figure. She looked like a sparrow among peacocks. "Good heavens," Mrs. Fitzsimmons whispered. "It's worse than we thought." But as the new Duchess moved forward on her husband's arm, there was something in her bearing that gave the gossips pause. She walked with quiet dignity, her head held high, her eyes, a clear, intelligent grey, meeting the stares of the ton without flinching. And the Duke looked down at his bride with an expression that could only be described as pride. "Your Grace," Lady Wetherby stepped forward, dropping into a curtsy before the couple. "We are honoured by your presence. And this must be your new Duchess. Welcome, my dear, to London society." "Thank you, Lady Wetherby," the Duchess replied, her voice soft but steady. "Your home is magnificent." "Come, my dear," the Duke said, his deep voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "Allow me to introduce you to our host, Lord Wetherby." As the couple moved through the crowd, the whispers resumed with renewed vigor. What could he possibly see in her? Perhaps she has a substantial fortune we don't know about. Or perhaps he needed to marry quickly to secure an heir. They say he has been in seclusion at his country estate for months. Perhaps there was a scandal we are not privy to. The speculation continued throughout the evening, growing wilder with each passing hour. The Duke, for his part, remained attentive to his new wife, though few could miss the tightness around his mouth as he overheard the not-so-subtle comments. The Duchess danced only with her husband and spoke little, but observed everything with those clear grey eyes. When they departed shortly before midnight, the collective sigh of relief was palpable. "Well," Lady Constance declared, "that was a disappointment. I had hoped for at least a little drama." She would not have long to wait. Eleanor Harrington, Duchess of Halsbury, sat quietly in the carriage as it rumbled through London's darkened streets toward Halsbury House. Beside her, James stared out the window, his jaw clenched in barely suppressed anger. "I apologize," he said finally, turning to her. "I knew they would be unkind, but I had not anticipated such blatant disrespect." Eleanor reached across the carriage to place her hand on his. "You have nothing to apologize for, James." We knew this would happen. They know nothing about you, he said fiercely. Nothing of your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. They see only what they wish to see. Eleanor smiled, a small, sad quirk of her lips. What they see is a plain country doctor's daughter who somehow ensnared one of England's most eligible dukes. You cannot blame them for their curiosity, or their suspicion. The carriage slowed as it approached the imposing facade of Halsbury House, a grand mansion on Berkeley Square that had been in the Duke's family for generations. Are you certain about tomorrow? James asked, studying her face in the dim light of the carriage lanterns. Absolutely, Eleanor replied, her quiet confidence never wavering. It's time. The following evening, the cream of London society gathered at Halsbury House for a grand reception in honour of the new Duchess. The invitation had caused quite a stir, coming so soon after the couple's less than triumphant appearance at the Wetherby Ball. She's either very brave or very foolish, Lady Constance remarked as she handed her cloak to a footman. To subject herself to such scrutiny again so soon. I hear the Duke commissioned Fairfield to paint her portrait, Mrs. Fitzsimmons replied. Perhaps she believes herself more attractive than she is. Lady Constance laughed. Even Fairfield cannot work miracles, my dear. The grand reception rooms of Halsbury House were ablaze with light, footmen in the Duke's livery moving efficiently through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. At the far end of the main salon stood an easel, draped in rich velvet cloth, clearly waiting to be unveiled. The Duke and Duchess stood near the entrance, greeting their guests. Eleanor wore a gown of deep emerald silk this time, its cut more flattering than her previous attire, but still modest by the standards of the day. Her hair was arranged simply, adorned with only a single emerald pin. Your Grace, Lady Constance curtsied deeply before the Duke, then offered a shallower bow to Eleanor. Duchess. What a lovely gathering. Lady Constance, James acknowledged with a cool nod. How kind of you to come. Eleanor merely smiled, her grey eyes observant as always. As the room filled, the whispers continued, but there was a current of anticipation running beneath them now. What would the portrait reveal? Had the Duke truly commissioned the great Fairfield, whose waiting list was years long, to immortalize his unremarkable bride? At precisely 9 o'clock, James raised a hand for silence, and the room gradually stilled. My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying easily through the salon. I thank you for joining us this evening to celebrate my marriage to the Duchess of Halsbury. He turned to Eleanor, who stood beside him, her face composed. Many of you have expressed interest in this union. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. It has come to my attention, James continued, his tone hardening slightly, that there has been considerable speculation regarding my reasons for choosing my wife. Some have suggested financial motivations. Others, more unsavory incentives. The room was now completely silent, the assembled aristocrats shifting uncomfortably under the Duke's direct gaze. I wish to put such rumors to rest. I married Eleanor because from the moment I met her, I recognized something that clearly eludes the perception of London society. He turned to the veiled easel. Perhaps this will help clarify matters. With a swift movement, he pulled away the velvet drape, revealing the portrait beneath. Gasps echoed through the salon. The woman in the portrait was Eleanor, unmistakably so, but transformed. Not by any artistic license or flattering technique, but by the pure truth of how she was seen through the eyes of love. Her grey eyes shone with intelligence and warmth, her slight smile revealing a hidden depth of humour and compassion. Her posture spoke of quiet strength, her hands, folded gracefully in her lap, of capability and purpose. It was not a portrait of conventional beauty, but of something far more powerful, character, revealed through the skilled hand of a master artist who had captured not just her appearance, but her essence. My wife, James said into the stunned silence, is a woman of extraordinary character. The daughter of a country physician, she spent her youth assisting her father, learning his craft, comforting the sick and dying. When influenza swept through Derbyshire last winter, taking her father among its victims, she continued his work, saving countless lives through her knowledge and tireless efforts. Eleanor's cheeks flushed slightly at this public recounting of her past. I met the Duchess, James continued, when I visited my northern estate during that same epidemic. I fell gravely ill, and it was her skill and care that saved my life. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes softening. And it was her mind, her spirit, and her heart that saved my soul. A murmur ran through the crowd as understanding dawned. The Duke's mysterious seclusion, his sudden marriage, it all made sense now. So you see, James concluded, turning back to the portrait, beauty, true beauty, is not confined to features that happen to align with current fashion. It resides in courage, in kindness, in intelligence, and in strength. That is what Fairfield has captured, and that is what I saw from the first moment I opened my eyes to find this remarkable woman tending to me. Eleanor stepped forward then, taking her husband's arm. My husband is far too kind, she said, her voice gentle but clear. But I would add one thing to his account. During those dark days when the fever nearly took him, James spoke often of London, of his responsibilities here, and of his loneliness amidst the very society that fills this room tonight. Her grey eyes swept across the assembled faces. It seems a great tragedy that one could be surrounded by so many yet feel so entirely alone. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the room, came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. The crowd parted to reveal an elderly woman making her way forward, leaning heavily on an ebony cane. "Well said, young woman," declared the Dowager Countess of Merewether, one of the most formidable and respected members of the ton. "It's about time someone spoke some sense in this room of peacocks." She stopped before Eleanor, studying her with sharp eyes that had witnessed over 8 decades of society's follies. "I knew your father," she said finally. "Dr. Prescott attended my late husband in his final illness. A good man. Kind. Competent." She nodded once, decisively. "You have his eyes." With that pronouncement, the tide began to turn. The Dowager Countess's approval, however grudgingly given, was a powerful endorsement. Other guests moved forward to view the portrait more closely, murmuring appreciatively about Fairfield's technique, the composition, the lighting, carefully avoiding any direct mention of their previous dismissal of the subject. Lady Constance found herself standing before the painting, studying it with growing discomfort. "It really is remarkable," she said to no one in particular. "How a great artist can reveal what ordinary eyes cannot see." "Indeed," came a voice beside her. Eleanor had approached silently. "Though I think it is less about the eye and more about the heart behind it." Lady Constance flushed. "Your Grace, please," Eleanor interrupted gently. "There is no need. I understand the ways of society better than you might imagine. My father may have been a country doctor, but he attended many great houses in his time. I grew up observing the subtle cruelties of the privileged from the shadows of sick-rooms." Lady Constance had the grace to look ashamed. "Nevertheless, I apologize for my behavior. It was unworthy." Eleanor smiled, a real smile that transformed her face in exactly the way the portrait had captured. "Then let us begin anew, Lady Constance. I am told you are a patroness of the Children's Hospital on Harley Street. I would be most interested to hear about their work." As the evening progressed, similar conversations unfolded throughout the salon. The Duke watched with satisfaction as his wife navigated the social waters with the same quiet competence she had shown in the sickroom. By the time the last guest departed, a subtle shift had occurred in London society's perception of the new Duchess of Halsbury. "You were magnificent," James said later that night as they sat before the fire in their private sitting room, the formality of their public persona set aside. Eleanor laughed softly. "I merely stood beside you while you delivered a masterful defense of your questionable choice in brides." James crossed to her chair, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "There was nothing questionable about my choice, Eleanor. Marrying you was the first truly wise decision I've made in my entire life." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "I still cannot quite believe this is real," she confessed. 6 months ago, I was a penniless orphan with no prospects, facing a future as a governess or companion. And now you are my Duchess," James completed, raising her hand to his lips. though I think we both know the title means far less than the woman who bears it." Eleanor's eyes grew serious. "The portrait was unnecessary, James. I have never cared what society thinks of me." "I know," he replied. "That is one of the countless reasons why I love you. But I care what they think of you, not for my sake, but for yours. I would not have you wounded by their petty cruelties." "Do you truly think it will make a difference?" "One evening cannot change the habits of a lifetime." James smiled. "Perhaps not for all of them. But did you see how many were genuinely moved? How many spoke to you afterward with real interest rather than feigned politeness?" Eleanor nodded slowly. Lady Meriwether's intervention was unexpected. "And powerful," James added. "With her approval, half the battle is won. The rest will follow in time, or not, as they choose. But they will never again speak ill of you in my presence, that much I guarantee." Eleanor rose from her chair, drawing him up with her. "Come to bed, Your Grace. Tomorrow we can continue the conquest of London society, but tonight I would rather focus on matters closer to home." James laughed, gathering her into his arms. "As my Duchess commands." Spring gave way to summer, and summer to autumn. With each passing month, the Duchess of Halsbury's position in society solidified. The portrait, now hanging prominently in the main gallery of Halsbury House, became something of a sensation. Fairfield found himself inundated with commissions from ladies who had previously sought only the most flattering, conventional depictions of themselves. Eleanor, for her part, eschewed the usual pastimes of aristocratic ladies. Instead, she established a small clinic in the East End, using her medical knowledge to serve those who could not afford physicians. James supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, providing funding and using his influence to smooth her path when opposition arose, as it inevitably did. A duchess practicing medicine, Lady Constance remarked to Mrs. Fitzsimmons as they watched Eleanor organize supplies for her clinic. "Who would have thought it?" "Who indeed?" Mrs. Fitzsimmons replied, but without her former derision. "Yet one cannot argue with the results. Did you hear about the militant child?" The doctors had given up hope, but the Duchess insisted on trying a new treatment she had read about. "The girl is now recovering." By the time winter returned to London, Eleanor Harrington, once dismissed as the plain, unremarkable bride of the Duke of Halsbury, had become one of the most respected women in London society. Not for her beauty, though many now noted the light in her eyes, the grace of her movements, the warmth of her smile, but for her character, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to using her position to benefit others. "You've transformed London," James told her one evening as they prepared for yet another social engagement. Eleanor shook her head, smiling at him in the mirror as she secured an earring. "Hardly. London remains as it always has been, obsessed with appearances, status, and gossip. Yet they respect you now. They seek your opinion, your approval." "They respect what I represent," Eleanor corrected gently. "The notion that worth exists beyond beauty, beyond wealth, beyond social connections. It is a lesson some were ready to learn." James crossed the room to stand behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You are too modest, my love. You have shown them that true beauty reveals itself through action, through purpose." Eleanor rose, turning to face him. "If I have achieved anything, it is only because you gave me the platform to do so. Many men in your position would have hidden away a plain wife, kept her from society to avoid embarrassment." "Many men are fools," James replied simply. Eleanor laughed, the sound filling the room like music. "On that, my dear Duke, we can certainly agree." Later that evening, at the Meriwether Winter Ball, Eleanor found herself standing with the Dowager Countess, observing the dancers. "You've done well," the old woman said abruptly. "Better than I expected." "Thank you, Lady Meriwether," Eleanor replied, hiding her amusement at the backhanded compliment. "Your father would be proud," the Countess continued, surprising Eleanor with the personal reference. "He always said you had more intelligence than half the physicians in London combined." Eleanor turned to her, startled. "He spoke of me to you?" The Dowager Countess nodded. "Many times, during my husband's final illness. He worried about your future, with no fortune or connections to recommend you. He never told me, Eleanor said softly. Men rarely tell us the important things, Lady Merweather replied with a sniff. But he need not have worried. You've made your own way, as capable women always do. Across the ballroom, James was deep in conversation with Lord Wetherby, but his eyes frequently sought out Eleanor, checking on her as was his habit. Catching her gaze now, he smiled, the private smile that was hers alone. Your husband loves you very much, the Countess observed, following Eleanor's line of sight. Yes, Eleanor agreed simply. And I him. Then you have achieved what few in this room can claim, the old woman said. True happiness. The rest, titles, wealth, position, these are mere trappings. Eleanor studied the lined face beside her, seeing beneath the crusty exterior to the wisdom gained through decades of observation. You are a surprising woman, Lady Merweather. The Countess chuckled, a dry sound like rustling leaves. As are you, Duchess. As are you. James joined them then, bowing respectfully to the Dowager Countess before offering his arm to his wife. I believe this dance is mine, if you are willing, my dear. Eleanor placed her hand on his arm, the gesture now as natural as breathing. Always. As they moved onto the dance floor, the crowd parted slightly, affording them space. No longer out of disdain or mockery, but out of respect for what they represented, a marriage based not on advantage or appearance, but on mutual admiration, shared purpose, and deepest love. They're watching us again, Eleanor murmured as James guided her through the opening steps of the waltz. Let them, he replied, drawing her slightly closer than propriety strictly allowed. Perhaps they'll learn something. Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the ballroom, drawing smiles from those who heard it. My darling Duke, you are incorrigible. Only where you are concerned, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Around them, the glittering world of London society continued its eternal dance of power and position. But within their circle of two, a different reality existed, one where a plain country doctor's daughter had found her rightful place, not by changing herself to fit society's expectations, but by holding true to who she was and allowing others to see her worth through the eyes of the man who loved her. And in that achievement lay a victory more profound than either of them could have imagined on that first difficult night when society had mocked the Duke's new wife for being plain, never dreaming of the portrait that would change everything.